When I walked into my parents' house on Christmas afternoon, someone had written one word across it in thick black marker. Thief. Torn wrapping paper covered the carpet. Half-opened boxes sat on people's laps. My father was lowering his phone after taking pictures. My sister Brittany had her arms folded, and my 16-year-old nephew Mason was staring at the floor. Ellie saw me and her face crumpled. "Mom, I didn't take it." I remember that sentence more clearly than anything else about Christmas that year. Before I tell you what happened next, I hope you're doing well today, and I hope you'll stay with me, because what I found after I took Ellie home changed the way I saw my family. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me until the end. This happened last Christmas, a little more than 2 months before I'm telling you about it now. I was 38, Ellie was 7, and I had made the mistake of believing that whatever problems existed between me and my mother would stay between adults. My mother, Linda, started talking before I even got my coat off. "Morgan, don't react until you hear what happened." I didn't answer her. I crossed the room, knelt in front of Ellie, and lifted the string over her head. The cardboard had rubbed a pink line across the side of her neck. It wasn't an injury, but seeing that mark did something to me that I can still feel when I think about it. I folded the sign in half and put it under my arm. "What did they say you took?" I asked Ellie. "A card for Grandpa." "I didn't ask you," Mom said. I asked her to tell the truth. I stood up and looked at my mother. She just did. Dad stepped forward with an empty red envelope in his hand. There was a silver snowflake sticker across the flap. I recognized it immediately because I had put it there myself 2 days earlier. "This was in Ellie's coat pocket," he said quietly. "Did you see her put it there?" "No, but I found it myself." "Where?" "In the mudroom. Linda said we should check everybody's coats in case someone moved it." That sentence stayed with me. 2 days earlier, I had bought Dad a $500 electronic gift card from a national electronics retailer. Dad had been talking about replacing an old tablet, so I bought the card through my customer account, printed the gift page, sealed it inside that red envelope, and drove it to my parents' house myself. I had even sent Dad a picture of the sealed envelope with a message telling him not to peek. But none of that mattered to me in that room yet. Ellie mattered. I took the envelope from Dad and slipped it into my purse. "Where's her coat?" Mom's face hardened. "Morgan, if you walk out before we finish this, you're teaching her there are no consequences. For something none of you saw her do?" The envelope was in her pocket. "And that is not the same sentence." Brittany shook her head. She kept denying it even after Dad found the envelope. At some point, you have to stop protecting her. I looked at my younger sister, then at Mason. He was sitting on the edge of an armchair with his hands between his knees. He still wouldn't look at Ellie. Dad rubbed his forehead. "I told Linda the sign was too much." I turned to him. "Did you take it off?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I found Ellie's coat on a hook in the mudroom and helped her into it. Mom followed us down the hallway, telling me I was making everything worse. She said Christmas had already been ruined. She said everyone had tried to handle it before I arrived because I was at work, and they didn't want to disturb me. She said Ellie had to learn that stealing damaged trust. I zipped Ellie's coat and picked up her small overnight bag. "You can explain all of this later," I told Mom. "After my daughter is out of this house." Mom followed us to the front door. "So you're just leaving?" "Yes. You're rewarding dishonesty." I opened the door. Cold December air rushed inside. "Then you should have no trouble proving she was dishonest." I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten anyone. I put my daughter in my car and drove away because there was nothing intelligent I could accomplish while Ellie was still standing inside the house where adults had decided humiliation counted as discipline. For the first 10 minutes of the drive, Ellie barely spoke. Then she started telling me what had happened in pieces. Grandma had said Grandpa's gift was missing. Everyone searched around the tree. Mom suggested checking coats because maybe somebody had moved the envelope without thinking. Grandpa reached into Ellie's pocket and pulled it out. Brittany said stealing had consequences. Mason stayed quiet. I started asking questions automatically. What time did they notice it missing? Was Grandma in the room when Grandpa checked your coat? Where was Mason? Did anyone go into the mudroom before that? Ellie turned toward the window. "Mom, I already told them I didn't do it." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. That was when I realized I was doing something I hated. I was turning my daughter's humiliation into an investigation and making her give testimony as if she still had something to prove. "I'm sorry," I said. "You don't have to answer anything else tonight. Do you believe me?" "Yes." She looked at me then. "Even without knowing where the card is?" "Yes." Her shoulders finally dropped a little. Once we were home, I made her hot chocolate, found one of the Christmas movies she liked, and let her curl up under a blanket. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Brittany. I didn't confront Mason. Facts mattered to me, and one thing my job had taught me was that people made mistakes when they rushed because they were angry. I worked in procurement and supply chain for a hospital system outside Columbus. My entire career was built around tracking what came in, what went out, when it moved, and who actually had access to it. If a shipment disappeared, I didn't accuse the person standing closest to the loading dock. I checked the record. So, after Ellie fell asleep on the couch, I put the red envelope on my kitchen table and opened my laptop. The first thing I checked was my own memory. I had purchased the gift card on Tuesday, December 23rd. Ellie had been at after-school care when I printed it. I had sealed the printout inside the envelope before picking her up. Then I had driven straight to my parents' house alone and handed it to Mom. Ellie had never seen the code. I opened the retailer account where I had bought the card. The purchase was still there. $500. Status: redeemed. My pulse changed. I clicked into the transaction details. The code had been redeemed at 7:18 on Christmas morning. I stared at the screen for several seconds before opening the location history and messages on my phone, not because I needed to prove anything to myself, but because I wanted the timeline exact. Ellie had slept at my house Christmas Eve. She had eaten breakfast across from me. We hadn't left home until after 9. I had dropped her at my parents' house at 9:40 before driving to the hospital distribution center for my holiday coverage shift. At 7:18 that morning, Ellie had been sitting at my kitchen table wearing reindeer pajamas and complaining that I had put too many blueberries in her pancakes. She hadn't even been in the same house as that gift card. I took screenshots of the purchase confirmation, the redemption time, and the account status. Then I found the picture I had taken 2 days earlier of the sealed red envelope with its silver snowflake sticker. I saved everything into a folder instead of firing off an angry message I might regret. Only then did I text my mother. "The card was redeemed at 7:18 this morning. Ellie wasn't in your house until 9:40. Every person who called her a thief needs to tell her they were wrong." Mom's reply came less than a minute later. "You don't understand what happened here." I read it twice. Until that moment, I had believed my family had made a terrible mistake. That message was the first time I wondered whether somebody already knew it wasn't a mistake. The next morning, Friday, December 26th, I woke up before Ellie. For a few seconds, the house was quiet enough that I could pretend Christmas had ended normally. Then I reached for my phone and saw messages from my mother, my father, and Brittany. What I did not see was a single message addressed to Ellie. Not one of the adults who had watched a 7-year-old stand beside a Christmas tree wearing the word thief had asked to speak to her so they could tell her they had been wrong. Mom had sent the most messages. Her first one said, "The redemption time did not prove what I thought it proved." Her second said, "Ellie could have seen the gift card code before Christmas." By the third, she had changed the theory again and suggested that maybe Ellie had taken the envelope earlier and someone else had used the code for her. I read all 3 messages twice, not because any of them made sense, but because I wanted to be sure I was seeing the pattern correctly. Every time one explanation stopped working, Mom replaced it with another. I answered only once. "Ellie was at after-school care when I printed and sealed the card. I delivered it to your house myself while she was still there. She had never seen the envelope or the code before Christmas morning. I almost added more, then deleted it. I had spent enough of my career watching people bury simple problems under unnecessary explanations. The facts did not become stronger because I typed them 5 different ways." Mom replied almost immediately. "Then maybe somebody showed it to her." That was the moment I stopped treating our conversation like a misunderstanding. She was no longer asking what had happened. She had decided what had happened and was searching for a version of events that could preserve it. Ellie came into the kitchen wearing mismatched socks and one of my old college sweatshirts that reached almost to her knees. I turned my phone face down before she could see the
dinner.
screen.
I had
And
passed
every
Walgreens
time he
three
offered to
times
help,
that month
cut an
already
Rachel,
on
orange for
3
his younger
different
sister,
apps to reach
would
my
deflect
grandmother.
with phrases like,
Every
"Don't
time the
worry,
door had
Mom's
closed,
got
She
it."
chose
I
home.
realized
Or, "We're
then
trying to
that my
keep it
parents
small."
had not
He'd
He'd
panicked
chalked it
at
up
the
to wedding
diagnosis.
stress.
Every new
They
He
had
told
planned
himself
for it.
not to
They
take it
had a script
personally,
ready before
but
Granny
now,
moved in.
seeing it
And
in
They had
writing
told the
finally,
hospice staff their version of me
unapologetic,
long
something
before the
inside
first
him
opioid
shifted.
was prescribed.
That
Ethan
morning,
didn't
I
respond.
drove home
He
that
didn't
night
ask
and
why.
she cried in the
He
bathtub
didn't
with
demand an
water running so
explanation.
the
I did
neighbors
not
wouldn't
ask her
Instead, he
about
stood
the
up,
missing car.
wa-
I did not ask her whether she remembered anything else. We watched half a movie, built a small model kit she had opened at my house Christmas Eve, and took a walk around the neighborhood after lunch because the air was cold but dry. I wanted one full morning in which nobody treated her like evidence. The more normal I made the day, the more clearly I understood how abnormal the day before had been. Around noon, I sent one message to Mom, Dad, and Brittany together. I am not asking any of you to identify who used the card before you know. I am asking you to correct what you did know. Ellie could not have redeemed it at 718, and there was never proof that she stole it. Everyone who called her a thief or participated in that punishment needs to tell her directly that you were wrong. Mom called within 2 minutes. I let it ring once before answering because I wanted Ellie to finish her lunch without hearing my side of the conversation. I stepped into the laundry room and closed the door. "You are making this into something it doesn't need to be," Mom said. "You put a sign around her neck." I was trying to make her understand the seriousness of stealing. "You still don't know that she stole anything. She was caught with the envelope. An envelope Dad found after you suggested searching everyone's coats." Mom exhaled sharply. "Morgan, adults do not need to apologize to a child every time discipline becomes uncomfortable. That isn't what I asked. She needs to learn respect. So do adults." There was a pause. Then Mom lowered her voice in the way she always did when she wanted to sound like the calm person in the room. "You're angry, and I understand that. But making everyone line up and apologize to Ellie is humiliating." I almost laughed. I didn't. "You seem to understand humiliation very well today." I ended the call before it turned into another circle. Dad contacted me an hour later. He did not defend the accusation as aggressively as Mom had, which somehow made the conversation harder.
I have been an
He told
ICU
me
nurse
he
for
had
8
barely
years.
slept. He
I know
said he had told
exactly what
Mom the sign was too
1.5
much
milligrams
and
per
admitted
hour
Christmas
of
she
morphine
never had
does
reached
to an
that point.
82-year-old woman in
Then he
post-op
said
day
he
2.
hoped I would give
I
everyone
looked
time
at
to
the
calm
IV
down
pump.
before making permanent
I looked at
decisions.
Brenda.
"Dad, did you
Brenda
take the sign off
looked
Ellie?"
at the IV pump.
He was quiet.
I said
"I know
quietly,
you didn't make it."
"The way you
I
talk in a room
continued.
with a sleeping
"I
patient."
know you didn't put it
Brenda,
around her neck.
she's on a
I'm asking
1.5
whether you
milligram
took it
morphine
off when you
drip.
saw it.
You can't
No.
notarize this.
Why?
You know you
At the
can't.
time, I thought
Right
the
away.
envelope
My
meant
father
something.
in the
Ethan just
charcoal
sat there
suit
for a
and
while,
steps in First
phone
Baptist
face
Greer.
down
I
on the
know that
table,
now.
The purple
letting the
heart
silence in his
lapel.
apartment
then
stretch
today.
as far as it
Bright
needed
Sunday
Started to
sun.
say Mom had
The
been
stillness
searching,
wasn't
and he stopped
uncomfortable.
himself.
He was
Mama
used
would
to
be
I
it.
could
so
hear the
He had
proud.
lived
discomfort in his
most of his
breathing.
life
She
in
let
that
it sit on
same
the
quiet
screen for
space
10
emotionally.
seconds.
Dad had
At
treated
least
did not
even
say
when the
anything
rooms
about
around him
weather.
were
She did
full of
not say
people who
If a storm
shared
came
his last
through,
name.
My
he
father
waited
That
looked
at
at the
message from his
window.
dad was a
He was
ripple,
not
Then Annabelle
but
played
not
the
yet a
voice
wave.
creepy. But
Not
standing
yet.
My grandmother's
still
voice
had
Ethan
came
had
out of the
learned
conference
early
room
I'm
speaker
that
not
being
asking you to
quiet
solve
was
the way it had
easier
filled
than
the
being
dining.
I told him. "I'm asking you to think about why you needed certainty that Ellie was innocent before you were willing to protect her from something obviously cruel." He didn't answer that. I did not rescue him from the silence. Brittany called later that afternoon. Her first words were, "Mom is devastated. Ellie was the one wearing the sign." I know. And I'm not saying the sign was right. But I really believe she took it, Morgan. Dad pulled the envelope out of her coat. "You weren't there. You didn't see how
She did
it
not
looked."
ask how I was.
That was the first
She
thing
said,
anyone had said that I could at
"Lily,
least understand.
you embarrassed Mom in front of a
Brittany had
hospital
watched
nurse.
Dad reach into Ellie's
She'll never
coat and
forgive you.
produce the exact
Just stay
envelope
away.
everyone was
It's
searching
better for everyone."
She had drawn the wrong
I
conclusion.
did not call my
but
sister
unlike
again
Mom,
for
she was
26
describing
months.
the evidence she had
In the
relied
summer
on
of
instead of inventing a new
2024,
theory
Cassandra
every 5
texted me
minutes.
from a coffee
"I
shop
can
in
accept
Greer.
that you believed
"Lily,
something yesterday," I
Granny
said.
moved into Mom and
"I
Dad's
can't
house
accept
last
refusing
week.
to correct it
They're
today.
saying it's just
I
until
don't
she
know the
gets
whole
stronger."
story yet.
She's
We
not
all
going
agreed
back
you're
to
not
Travelers
welcome.
Professor. What whole story? I just mean we should figure everything out first. Why does figuring out who used the card have to happen before you tell Ellie she should never have been called a thief? Brittany went quiet, then said I was twisting her words. She reminded me that she had a son too, and that parents sometimes had to wait for facts before reacting. I almost pointed out the irony, but I let it go. What stayed with me was the phrase she had used. I don't know the whole story yet. It sounded less
I
like
packed my
uncertainty
evidence.
than
It's not
confident.
healthy. I
After
remember
drove
the
home, I opened the folder I
135
received the night
miles.
before
I
to
remember
New Haven
Granny
started
in the
ordering
doorway
with
with
a
a
ham
Sophia
platter.
from the parking lot at
Not looking at her
Purchase
daughter.
confirmation
I
for
not
December
looking at
25th.
me. Sophia, walking
Almost
past
Photos
time.
with
The
sealed
platter
red
Lily is
envelope
here
as
too.
if
The room
redemption
had been
at
she wrote back.
7:18 Christmas
See,
morning.
she knew.
Vamos.
My location
She had
history
known.
showing
8:50
Ellie
years.
was
I walked
still
into
home.
Sterling Hall conference. My
I was
grandfather
not building
Henry
a case
died of
against
confrontation. My
anyone
sister
yet.
was already at the
I
Chase
wanted a
boat. Our family
timeline
that the
because
VA
timelines
spent
had a way of
35
stripping
years.
emotion
The
away
committee
from
was
claims
assembling
people
on the
kept
other.
changing. Then I opened the family group chat. There were dozens of Christmas messages. Mom had posted a picture of the tree before sunrise. Dad had sent a joke about coffee. Brittany had complained that Mason had eaten half the cinnamon rolls before anyone else got downstairs. I scrolled past all of it until a message from Mason stopped me. It had been posted at 7:29 that morning. Mason had shared a screenshot of an order confirmation for the electronics item he had been talking about for months. It cost just under $500. Under the screenshot, he had written, "Finally got it before they sold out." I looked back at the retailer record. The gift card had been redeemed at 7:18. Mason's order confirmation had appeared 11 minutes later. 11 minutes was not proof. I knew that, and I refused to forget it just because the timing made my stomach tighten. My family had already shown me what happened when suspicion was treated like fact. Still, I saved the screenshot. Then I looked at those two timestamps side by side. 7:18, 7:29, 11 minutes. By late Friday afternoon, I had two timestamps sitting next to each other on my laptop, and one very convenient suspect forming in my head. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Brittany had changed jobs a few weeks earlier. I knew the transition had been rough because she had asked Mom for a small loan to cover expenses between paychecks. She had also spent most of Christmas insisting the empty envelope in Ellie's coat had to mean something. If I wanted an easy story, I already had one. My financially stressed sister took Dad's gift card, panicked, and helped blame my daughter. The problem was that an easy story was exactly what my family had built around Ellie. I closed the family chat and wrote 3 words on a notepad beside my computer. Suspicion is not proof. It sounds obvious now. It should have been obvious in my parents' living room too. I could dislike Brittany's behavior without inventing the rest of the story around it. I could remember all the times Mom had rescued her from bad decisions without pretending those memories proved she had stolen $500. If I was going to demand better from my family, I had to start by demanding it from myself. Ellie had been coloring at the dining table while I worked. I had promised myself I would not question her again, so when she came into the kitchen and asked for apple slices, I simply made them. A few minutes later, while she was dipping one into peanut butter, I asked one question. "Is there anything you want me to know about yesterday that you didn't get to tell me?" I made sure she understood she did not have to answer. She thought for a moment. Mason was crying. That caught my attention, but I kept my voice neutral. "When?" "Before Grandpa found the envelope, I think." She frowned, concentrating. "He went near the kitchen with Grandma. His face was really red. I heard Grandma say, 'Give me whatever you have left.' Then she saw me and told me to go back by the tree." "What did you think she meant?" Ellie shrugged. "Wrapping paper? Or money?" Mason always has cash in his wallet. I thanked her and let the subject end there. She went back to coloring without realizing that the sentence had lodged itself in my mind. "Give me whatever you have left." It could have meant 20 harmless things. Change, a receipt, leftover cash, some Christmas errand I knew nothing about. I wrote the words on my notepad and drew no conclusion beside them. Still, they brought back memories I had worked hard not to turn into evidence. Mason had always been the child Mom rushed to protect. When he scratched Dad's car the previous summer, Mom had spent more time explaining why he had been distracted than asking why he had taken the car without permission. When he lost money during a school trip, Mom replaced it before Brittany even knew. None of those things made Mason a thief. They did tell me something about the family system around him. Consequences rarely reached him without passing through Linda first. I called Brittany shortly after 5. I waited until Ellie was in her room building a puzzle because I did not want her listening to adults debate the accusation again. Brittany answered on the 4th ring, sounding tired. "I'm not calling to fight," I said. "I need to ask you one question about Mason." Her tone changed immediately. What about him? He posted that order confirmation Christmas morning. Do you know how he paid for it? There was a brief silence. Then she said, I didn't take Dad's gift card. I leaned back in my chair. I didn't say you did. You didn't have to. I asked how Mason paid for his order. And I know how you think, Morgan. You see that I borrowed money from Mom, and now suddenly I'm the obvious suspect. That answer told me two things. First, Brittany knew exactly why she looked suspicious. Second, she was angry enough about it that she was answering questions I had not asked. I know you asked Mom for money, I said, because you told me yourself when you changed jobs. I also know needing help for a few weeks does not make you a thief. That's generous. It's accurate. She gave a short laugh without humor. You always get to be accurate. I'm the one who gets to be irresponsible. There it was, the old argument under the new one. Brittany had spent years hearing Mom describe me as capable and her as sensitive. Somehow both labels had become insults. I was expected to need nothing. And Brittany learned to hear any question about her choices as judgment. I understood where that came from. I was not going to let it drag us away from what mattered. What did Mason use to pay for the electronics order? I don't know. Did you ask him? Why would I? Because the order was placed 11 minutes after Dad's gift card was redeemed. This time the silence lasted longer. I'm not accusing him, I said. I'm telling you why I'm asking. Brittany exhaled. You're already building some spreadsheet in your head, aren't you? No, I'm making sure I don't do exactly what all of you did to Ellie. For once, she had no immediate answer. Then she said, I've had enough of everyone acting like I'm hiding money because I asked Mom for help. I changed companies in November. My first full paycheck came later than I expected. I was short on the mortgage and utilities for 1 week. Mom lent me $800. I paid back $300 already. I know. Then stop treating it like a clue. I am. That's why I haven't accused you of anything. Her voice softened a fraction, but the defensiveness stayed. Mason saved money too. He works weekends sometimes. He gets birthday money. He didn't even know the card was for Dad until later. My hand stopped over the notepad. I replayed the sentence before answering. I had never told Brittany I suspected Mason. More importantly, I had never told her I was wondering whether Mason knew whose card it was. I had only asked how he paid for an order. When did I say anything about Mason knowing the card was for Dad? I asked. Brittany went silent. I stared at the wall in front of me. Until then, Mason had been a possibility created by 2 timestamps.
Then I
Brittany had
noticed
just
the
added
woman
something
standing
different.
2 feet behind
Not proof that
Patty.
he had taken anything,
Light
but
blue
knowledge
scrubs.
she had no reason to volunteer,
Name tag
unless
Brenda
the subject
Markham,
had already been
RN.
discussed. Brittany,
I
you're
didn't
doing it
recognize
again.
her from this floor.
Doing what?
She wasn't a
Turning every word
circulating
into
nurse.
evidence.
She wasn't
No.
a charge nurse.
I'm
But
listening
she
to the
had a
words you
notary
chose.
stamp in her hand.
She made a
A
frustrated
lot of
sound.
South Carolina nurses pick
Mom
up a
told
notary
everybody the
commission
missing
for
card was Dad's
$50 of
gift.
side income.
Everybody knows
Patty had
that.
clearly arranged it
That
ahead of
isn't what you
time.
said.
She had been
You
waiting
said
for the
Mason
morphine.
didn't know it was for Dad until later. So? So later than what? She didn't answer. I kept my voice even. Did Mason tell you something? No. Did Mom? No. Then how do you know there was a point when Mason didn't know whose card it was? Brittany snapped that I was interrogating her. I told her I wasn't asking for bank statements or access to her phone. I was asking about a sentence she had just spoken to me. She changed direction. Maybe Mason saw the envelope. Maybe Mom mentioned it. I don't remember every conversation in that house. That's possible. My agreement seemed to throw her off. I continued. That's why I'm asking instead of accusing. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I could hear television noise behind her and what sounded like a cabinet closing. Then Brittany said quietly, You have no idea what Mom is dealing with right now. I almost asked what that meant. Instead, I stayed with the one question I could actually justify. When did Mason tell you? The line went so quiet I checked the screen to make sure the call had not dropped. Brittany? She inhaled sharply. Then she hung up. I did not call back. I set the phone beside my laptop and looked at the notes in front of me. Brittany's financial trouble had started the afternoon, looking like the obvious answer. By 5:30, I no longer thought she had taken the gift card. I thought she knew who had. And for the first time, I had to consider the possibility that the adults in my parents' house were not refusing to apologize because they were still confused. They might have been refusing because an apology to Ellie would force them to say what they already knew. Brittany called me back 23 minutes after hanging up. I knew because I had looked at the clock when the first call ended, then made myself close the laptop and help Ellie finish her puzzle instead of sitting there inventing explanations. When Brittany's name appeared again, I stepped into my bedroom and answered. She started speaking before I could say hello. I talked to Mason.
60 years
Your
your
sister
sister
saw
will
the
be
envelope
dismissed
yesterday
from medical
morning.
school.
That's
There was the
probably
thing
why
she
I
will
said
never
he didn't
become a
know
doctor.
his
Then there was the
grandpa's
small
until
cedar
later.
box.
Is
on
that
the
what
high
Lily
shelf
would
What I
want?
she
asked you
called.
before.
Lily
I
would
said.
want both of
She
you
never
to be
let me
I
doctors.
asked
open
when
that
Mason
one.
told you
She
something.
Lily
said,
would want healing.
You're making
"You'll
this
know
sound
what to
worse
do with
than
the
it is.
important
are the
box
one
when
I'm
the time
repeating the
comes.
question.
Family apart.
Brittany
By the
sighed
time
hard
I was a
enough that I could hear
teenager,
it
I
through
had
the
a
phone.
private
It
theory
is
that
not
my
too
mother
late.
hated
I saw
this
the
room.
envelope
Your
under the
father
chair.
agrees
with
reformed
me.
Christianity
Mom
the
had
way
probably
some
told
women
him it was
reform
your gift
yoga.
for Dad.
At
Loudly.
11:23,
I don't
my
remember
father
every
toasted me
detail.
separately in
I
front of
sat
the
on the
right
edge of my
people.
bed. The gift card was redeemed at 7:18. Mason posted his order confirmation at 7:29. That is all I know. I am not calling that proof. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to matter. Then Brittany asked, "What are you going to do to him if he took it?" I closed my eyes for a second. Until that moment, I had been careful not to accuse Mason to her. I had said his name, mentioned the order, and asked how he paid for it. Brittany had now jumped all the way to consequences. I haven't decided Mason took anything. But if he did, then he took something that wasn't his and lied about it. He's 16, Brittany. That would need consequences from the adults responsible for him. Her voice sharpened. So you're going to call the school? Tell Grandpa? Ruin that engineering program he's supposed to do this summer? No. You say that now. I'm saying it because I mean it. I'm not interested in destroying a 16-year-old over one bad decision. I'm interested in why my 7-year-old was punished for something she didn't do. Brittany went quiet again. Before she could answer, my phone vibrated against my leg with another incoming call. It was Dad. I let it go to voicemail and stayed with Brittany. You know what scares me about this? I said. Every conversation since yesterday has been about protecting somebody from consequences. Mom wants protection from admitting she was wrong. Dad wants protection from conflict. You want protection from whatever might happen to Mason. The only person nobody protected was Ellie. That's not fair. No, it wasn't. She started crying then, quietly at first. I knew my sister well enough to recognize the difference between anger and fear. This was fear. I didn't know yesterday, she said. I stopped breathing for a beat. Know what? She didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. Mason told me after you left. I stood up and walked to the bedroom door, then shut it even though Ellie was still across the hall with her puzzle. Told you what? That he used the card. There it was. Not a theory. Not a timestamp. Not a screenshot. A confession repeated by his mother. I felt anger rise fast, but I kept my voice level. Tell me exactly what he said. He came into the laundry room after you left. He was crying. He said he had taken the printout from the envelope early that morning and used the code to buy the graphics tablet he wanted. He thought he could replace the money before anyone figured it out. How? I don't know, he wasn't thinking. Did he say why the envelope ended up in Ellie's coat? No. Did he say who put it there? No. I believe that answer because Brittany gave it without hesitation. The distinction mattered. Mason using the code proved who had taken Dad's gift. It did not yet prove who had framed Ellie. What did you tell Mason? That he had to return the tablet. And tell Dad? Brittany's breathing changed. I already knew the answer. Morgan, please understand what's at stake. For Mason? Yes, for Mason. Dad has been talking about that summer engineering program for months. It costs several $1,000s. He offered to pay most of it because Mason got accepted and because he thought it could help with college applications. If Dad finds out Mason stole his Christmas gift, that money is gone. It might be. You know it will be. That's Dad's decision. He made one stupid mistake. I stood beside my window, looking out at the gray December sky. And Ellie? What about her? She was 7 years old yesterday, too. I know that. She was made to stand beside a Christmas tree wearing a sign that called her a thief because of Mason's stupid mistake. I said I know. No, Brittany, I don't think you do. She went silent. I continued more quietly. You had a chance last night to call me. You knew before you went to bed that Ellie had been telling the truth. You didn't call. I was trying to figure out what to do. You could have started with an apology. What would that change? The damage was already done. The words settled between us. I had heard people justify ugly decisions in a lot of ways, but that one was almost elegant in its selfishness. Because Ellie had already been hurt, Brittany was using the hurt itself as a reason not to correct the lie. So that's the calculation? I asked. Ellie already suffered, so telling the truth would only make Mason suffer too? That isn't what I meant. It's exactly what you said. I'm trying to protect my son, and I'm protecting my daughter. He could lose something that affects his future. Then he should have thought about that before he stole $500 from Grandpa. Brittany started telling me I had always been harder on her than on myself, that I had no idea what it felt like to raise a teenage boy who made impulsive decisions, that Mason was embarrassed and terrified and already hated himself for what he had done. I let her finish. None of those things erased what happened to Ellie, and none of them required me to turn Mason into a monster either. I am not calling his school, I said. I am not posting anything. I am not calling the police. I'm not going after Mason. But I will not lie to Dad. And I will not let Ellie carry this because you're afraid of what Dad might do with the truth. You don't have to tell him tonight. I'm not promising you silence. She began crying harder. Please, Morgan. For years, that word from Brittany had worked on me. Please meant she needed help moving. Please meant she was short until payday. Please meant Mom was upset and I should come over and smooth things out. I had never thought of myself as someone who sacrificed everything for my family, because I didn't. I had my own home, my own career, my own boundaries, but I had spent years believing that if the cost to me was small, keeping the peace was efficient. Christmas had changed the math. I'm sorry you're scared, I said, but I'm not taking responsibility for the consequences of something Mason chose to do. Brittany ended the call without saying goodbye. I sat on the bed for another minute before checking the missed call from Dad. There was no voicemail, so I called him back. He answered quickly. Morgan, I've been thinking about the times. What times? Yesterday morning. Brittany and Mason stayed here Christmas Eve, remember? They came over after dinner and slept downstairs because Brittany didn't want to drive back early in the morning. Mason was awake before I was. That placed him in the house with access to the gifts long before 7:18. Dad continued, his voice slower now. And there's something else. Before Linda suggested checking the coats, Mason disappeared for a while. I thought he went upstairs to shower.
Too.
Linda went
But
toward the
where's all of
kitchen
the
right after
difference?
him.
Lily
She
would.
said,
Did you see
on
them
the
together?
evening of
Because
April
no.
7th, the
She
night
said it
before
the
the
way she
hearing,
said
said
everything
Juliet
important.
called
Then
me.
don't turn it
Slow.
into
Her
more
voice
than
was
you know.
broken, but
He
practiced.
was
And
quiet
once.
for a moment.
Elizabeth, she did not
You
repeat
sound like
herself.
you're
I will
talking
lose
to
everything.
yourself.
You weren't paying
I
attention.
am.
Lose Yale. The lesson
I
moved
told
on
you
without
I
you.
had
Future.
confessed to
Over the
Brittany
next
after
20
Ellie
years,
and I
she
were
walked me
old.
through what was in the
Dad did
cedar
not
box on the
speak for
table.
several
I said,
seconds.
and what would
Then
one
he
day
said,
be you did not
so
make
Ellie
on the
never
high
took it.
shelf. You wrote
No.
5,000
There were
words
11
about
letters
child
my
you
grandfather
less than
Henry had
6
written
hours.
her.
I
I wanted
unfolded
to
it.
tell him
Lily,
that
pencil,
realization had
call
come a
this
day
a
late.
child holding the hand of a
Instead,
woman. For
I asked
14
him to
days,
think
I had
carefully
not been
about
both of
yesterday
them
morning
looking at
before
each
talking
other.
to
14
Mom.
days, I had been
On
the
the
daughter
dawned
who
memory,
still
in
hoped her
shaky
mother would
pencil
say
letters
something
by
true.
whatever Linda
For
said
when you
next.
graduate, my mother had just
Dad
answered
agreed
the
and hung
question
up.
for me.
About 10
I set
minutes
the
later,
alarm. I
while
took
I
a
was putting my
photograph of it
laptop
where it
away,
lay. Tomorrow I would
my
drive
phone buzzed
100
with a
miles
text
south
from
on
him.
I put the original in the inner pocket of
before
my
we searched
Augusta
the
Road in
coats.
Greenville.
I
I went
heard Mason
downstairs.
tell your mother
I
he
would
was
meet a
sorry.
woman my
The
grandmother
second
had been
messenger.
sitting across
He
from
told
since
her
I
he
had
was
been
6
notified by the
old.
Yale
Dad
Committee
came
on
to my house a little after 6 that evening, carrying his phone and a folded sheet of printer paper. I had already fed Ellie and set her up in the living room with a Christmas movie. When I opened the door, Dad looked older than he had 24 hours earlier. He asked whether Ellie was awake, and when I said yes, he lowered his voice before stepping inside. I wrote down everything I remember, he said, before I talk myself out of it. We sat at the kitchen table. Dad unfolded the paper and pushed it toward me. His handwriting covered most of the page, with arrows where he had remembered things out of order. I did not correct him or start rearranging the story for him. I asked him to tell me what he remembered first, without using anything Mom had said afterward. He stared at the paper for a moment, then admitted that was harder than he expected. Before we checked the coats, I walked past the kitchen, he said. Mason was in there with your mother. I didn't see them clearly because I was going toward the dining room. But I heard Mason say,
Marilyn,
Tabitha.
we
I'm
all
sorry,
agreed
my
you're
sister
not
had
welcome
come.
at the
I
wedding.
kept my
3
hands
days
No
later.
later, the
punctuation,
hospice
no
coordinator,
explanation.
the interim health
Just that
worker in
smug little
Greenville
dash
called me.
she
said,
always
polite
used in
voice,
place of a
enough.
period.
Go upstairs.
Ethan
Careful.
stared at the
Did you know what
message,
they were
later,
talking
unsure
your
if his
parents
eyes
had
were playing
indicated
tricks
that
on
for
him.
the patient's
I thought
He read it
emotional
again.
stability,
Then
certain
again.
family
The
The
members
words
should
didn't
not
change.
visit
It
unannounced.
It wasn't entirely a shock,
I'm so
though.
sorry.
I barely
The
thought
signs
about
This is
had
a
been there
family
subtle,
decision we have to
accumulating
make.
over
memory
months.
useful.
He
I
hadn't been
sat in the
included in the
parking
group
lot of
photo
Walgreens
planning,
with the
He was
hadn't
not
received
suddenly
an
claiming
invite
that
to
he
the
had known
engagement.
Mason stole the card. He had heard a conversation, assigned an ordinary meaning to it, and moved on. Only after learning the card had been used by Mason did the words change shape. I opened my notebook. What happened after that? Linda came back into the living room. We still hadn't opened most of the gifts. I asked where Mason was. She said he wasn't feeling well and had gone upstairs. Then I noticed my envelope wasn't with the other gifts. That filled in a gap I had been waiting to close. Dad knew I had brought him a red envelope because I had texted him the photo 2 days earlier and told him not to peek. When it was not under the tree where Mom said she had put it, Dad asked about it. Mom suggested someone might have moved it while sorting presents. She said we should check around before accusing anybody, Dad continued. Under the couch, the kitchen counter, coats. She said somebody could have picked it up by mistake. Whose idea was it to check the coats? Your mother's. Did she say Ellie's coat? No. She said everybody's. I wrote that down exactly. Mom had not publicly pointed at Ellie. That mattered. If I later claimed she had directed Dad straight to my daughter's coat, I would be changing the facts to make my anger easier to explain. Dad rubbed both hands over his face. I checked mine first, then Brittany's. Mason's coat was on the bench. Nothing. Ellie's was hanging
Anything
still
else in your family's
I replied,
possession?
I put my hand in the
anything
outside
physical,
pocket
actually
and felt the
connected to
envelope.
Lily Grandma's
Was the
lawyer,
pocket
and I knew
closed?
who she really
No
trusted.
zipper.
I just did
Just
not
to
know
know
where
where
it
it
was
was.
yet. It wasn't my
Who could have
lawyer who
reached
called.
it?
I called so it was
Anybody
there.
who walked through the mudroom.
His voice
I
had
had
not
answered
called her in
frustrated
4
months.
months.
I
We
could
need
she
to
just
pick up
wanted
nervous.
something cleaner.
Right the way
now.
she
He
always
wanted to
picked
be
up
able
when
to
she
thought
did not
they had
recognize
one
the
and
number
say
on the
there.
screen. They had
That
no
is where it
idea
happened.
that every cruel
I wrote
thing
down
they
the
did
facts
in that
in
hospice
Sophie's
room.
room.
I
The
had been
mudroom was
watching
open
them.
to the
I need to
whole
ask
room.
you something.
Mom
My
had gone
name
to
is
the lift
Lily
several
Slater in
times that
person.
morning.
33.
Brittany had too. Dad had. Mason could have. Ellie could have. There was no camera, no locked door, no witness standing there every minute. We cannot say who put the envelope in the coat, I said. Dad stared at me. Even now? Especially now. He nodded reluctantly. I turned the notebook sideways and started building the chronology in plain language. The gift card had been redeemed at 7:18. Mason's electronics order appeared at 7:29. Ellie arrived at my parents' house at 9:40. Dad remembered hearing Mason apologize to Mom and promise repayment sometime before 11. After that, Mom returned to the living room and said Mason had gone upstairs. Dad discovered the gift was missing. Mom suggested checking possible places, including coats. Dad found the red envelope in Ellie's pocket. The accusation followed. The sign appeared later. I arrived shortly before 3 that afternoon. Dad watched me write. When you put it like that, it looks terrible. It was terrible before I wrote it down. He flinched, but I did not apologize. I also did not tell him he had been tricked and therefore carried no responsibility. Mom might have manipulated the search. Dad had still watched adults put a sign around Ellie's neck. I should have taken that thing off her, he said. Yes. I told Linda it was too much. I know. That doesn't count for much, does it? No. He nodded slowly. I didn't think so. From the living room, I heard Ellie laugh at something in the movie. The sound made me glance toward the doorway. For 1 second, I considered asking her to come in and tell Dad exactly what she had seen in the kitchen, whether Mason had been holding something, whether Mom had put anything in her pocket earlier. The thought lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then I shut the notebook. Dad noticed. What? Nothing. I almost asked Ellie another question. You should. She might remember. No. His eyebrows lifted. She already told us what she remembers. Mason was upset. Mom told him to give her whatever he had left. I'm not making her reconstruct the worst Christmas she's ever had because the adults need better evidence. Dad looked toward the living room and then down at his hands. You're right. I appreciated hearing it, but I did not treat it as redemption. Dad was starting to understand how badly he had failed Ellie. Understanding was the beginning of responsibility, not the end. He picked up his phone. There's one person we can ask without putting her through it. Mason? Dad nodded. I did not love the idea of cornering a 16-year-old over speakerphone. I told Dad that if he called, Mason needed to know I was present before anything was put on speaker. Dad agreed. Mason answered after several rings. Dad kept the phone against his ear at first. It's Grandpa, he said. I'm at Aunt Morgan's house. She's sitting here with me. I need to ask you about yesterday. Is it okay if I put you on speaker? There was a pause. Then Dad tapped the screen and placed the phone on the table. Mason's voice came through small and strained. Okay. Dad did not start with the gift card. You talked to Grandma in the kitchen yesterday morning. Another pause. Yeah. I heard you tell her you were sorry and that you'd pay it back. I know. What had you told her? Mason's breathing was audible through the speaker. Grandpa, Mom already knows about the card. I'm not asking what your mother knows. I'm asking when your grandmother knew. Mason did not answer. Dad tried again. Did you tell Grandma before we searched for my envelope? Yes. Dad closed his eyes. I stayed silent. Mason continued. I told her I used it. I was freaking out. She told me to go upstairs. Did she know Ellie hadn't taken
Through
it?
hospital
I told her I
security
took
under
the
the
code.
Internal
That was the
Volunteer
cleanest
Coordination
answer we
Audit
had heard all
Policy.
day. Dad
She had
leaned
been
toward
at
the
Boston
phone.
Children's
Why
24
didn't you come
years.
back downstairs and
They
tell
trusted
me?
her.
Grandma
The
told me
first
not
file
to.
was my patient
Exactly what did
navigator
she
log.
say? I don't remember everything.
3,200 total
intelligence,
hours of
battery
text
saves
messages.
power, and
Mason
updates are automatic.
1,180 of
Yeah.
those
Work
hours were
interrupted.
specifically with Lily Donovan
Dell
and her
Pro
mother.
Another long
Bedside
silence
reading,
followed.
translation,
And Mason said,
family
I'll
conferences,
send it.
hospice
Dad's phone
support.
chimed
We're
for a
Phoenix
second.
Energy,
After-hours
a
visits
I
family-owned
opened the screenshot and turned the screen toward me. The message from Mom had been sent after Mason went upstairs. Stay upstairs. Don't say anything until I talk to your mother. There was nothing in the text about Ellie. Nothing about an envelope. Nothing that proved Mom had planted anything. But it proved something important enough on its own. Linda knew Mason had used the card, and she instructed him to remain upstairs and stay quiet while she handled the adults. Dad swallowed. Mason, before you went upstairs, did you give Grandma something? Mason said nothing. Dad waited. I thought about Ellie standing in my kitchen earlier that day, trying to remember a conversation she had never understood. Give me whatever you have left, Dad asked again, more gently. What did you give her? Mason finally answered. What I had left. My eyes met Dad's. What does that mean? He asked. I don't want to talk about it. Mason. I said I don't want to talk about it. His voice cracked.
Phone lit up
Before
again.
We're going
Dad
to
could
play
press
3
on,
things,
A message.
I shook my
Annabelle
head.
said.
This time,
That's enough.
it
Then
wasn't
we're
from
going to talk.
Marilyn.
Mason could hear
It
me.
wasn't from
She started
Rachel.
clip
We're not
3.
It wasn't
forcing
even
you.
from
My
one
mother
of the
watched
cousins,
herself.
who likely had no idea what had
Dad
just
told me
happened.
we would talk
It was
again
from
later.
his father,
Slide her
Thomas
own
Miller.
mother's
For several
engagement
You
seconds,
around?
neither of
I
us
think you
was
should
finger.
see something.
We still did not
The
know
Just
audio
what
that.
was
had
perfectly
happened.
7
clear.
words.
We still
No
did not
drama,
know who put
no
the
I'm just
envelope
gonna
emotion.
look
into
at
Ellie's
it.
coat.
Just a quiet
Ellie
flag
had
in the
heard the
wind,
conversation
signaling
mother
that
opened
whatever
her mouth.
Ethan had
Mason had
assumed
repeated
about
the
the
exact
boundaries of
phrase
this
she
family
That's editing.
fracture.
And Mom had known the truth before the search ever began. I looked down at the timeline one more time. Dad, I said. The envelope didn't make Mom suspect Ellie. It showed up after Mom already knew Mason had done something. Saturday morning, 2 days after Christmas, my phone started vibrating before 8. By the time Ellie came into the kitchen asking whether we had any cinnamon cereal left, Mom had called 6 times and left 3 voicemails. The first sounded like the woman I had known all my life. Controlled, irritated, certain that everyone else was making things harder than necessary. Morgan, call me. Your father is getting worked up, and this needs to be handled like adults. The second was less steady. By the third, the control had cracked. Morgan, please answer. We need to fix this before your father turns it into something it isn't. That was when I understood she was no longer calling because she wanted me to hear her version. She was calling because Dad had finally stopped accepting it. I turned the phone face down and poured Ellie cereal. She was wearing fuzzy socks and had tied her hair back with a red ribbon she had found in a drawer. I did not tell her Grandma was calling. I did not let the voicemails play where she could hear them. Christmas had already taken enough space inside her head, and I was not going to let Mom occupy Saturday morning, too. I switched my phone to silent but did not block her. At that point, I had learned the difference between refusing access and destroying a record of what someone was choosing to say. Ellie asked whether Grandpa was still mad at her. I put down my coffee. Grandpa knows you didn't take the card. Did Grandma know? There are questions children ask that adults spend entire lives trying to avoid. I could have softened it, delayed it, or told her the adults were still sorting things out. Instead, I chose the part I knew for certain. Grandma knew Mason had done something wrong before they searched your coat. Ellie stared into her cereal. Then why did she let them think it was me? I don't have an answer that makes sense yet. She nodded, but I could tell that answer bothered her because it bothered me too. Children assume adults have reasons. Sometimes growing up is discovering that a reason can exist and still be wrong. Mom called twice more while we cleaned the kitchen. Then the house went quiet for almost an hour. I started to think she had finally understood that I would answer when I was ready. At 9:30, a car door slammed outside. I looked through the front window and saw Mom walking up my driveway. I told Ellie Grandma had come by and asked her to stay inside while I talked to her. Ellie did not argue. I stepped onto the porch and pulled the door closed behind me before Mom reached the top step. She stopped when she realized I was not inviting her in. Are you seriously making me stand outside? Ellie is inside. I came to see both of you. You came without asking. Her mouth tightened. Because you wouldn't answer. I wasn't ready to talk. Well, I am. That isn't the same thing. For a moment, we just looked at each other in the cold. Mom had always been good at entering a room as if she owned the emotional temperature inside it. Standing on my porch took some of that away. She could not lower her voice and expect me to follow her into the kitchen. She could not hug Ellie before I had decided whether Ellie wanted to be hugged. She had to stay exactly where I had stopped her. Your father came home last night acting like I planned some crime, she said. He's going through every minute of Christmas as if we're in court. He came to my house because he was trying to remember what happened. And you encouraged him? I asked him not to guess. Mom folded her arms. Mason admitted what he did. Fine, he was wrong. Nobody is arguing about that anymore. Then why did you tell him to stay upstairs and keep quiet? I was trying to keep him from making things worse. They got worse. He is 16 years old, Morgan. 16. He made one stupid, impulsive decision. Do you have any idea what could happen if your father decides this proves Mason is some kind of criminal? Dad deciding whether to pay for a summer program is not the same as calling him a criminal. You know what that program means to him. I did. Mason had been accepted into a summer engineering program that Thomas had talked about for months. It was expensive enough that Brittany could not comfortably cover it alone, and Dad had offered to pay most of the cost. Mom talked about it as if admission itself were proof that Mason was headed somewhere important. One mistake should not define the rest of his life, she said. I agree. That surprised her. I continued before she could use it. That's why I haven't called his school. I haven't called the police. I haven't posted anything online. I haven't contacted the program. Mason stole a gift card. He needs consequences, but I'm not interested in ruining a 16-year-old. Then what do you want? I wanted you to apologize to Ellie. I can apologize for the sign. No, you can tell her she was innocent and that you knew enough before that search to know Mason was responsible for what was missing. Mom looked away toward the street. It wasn't that simple. Then make it simple. She rubbed her hands together against the cold. Mason came to me terrified. He was crying. He said he had done something stupid, and he was scared your father would pull the summer program. I knew Thomas would react emotionally.
About to fold.
I almost stopped her at the phrase
You just made an
react
enemy of
emotionally,
this family.
but I wanted to hear
2
the
weeks
rest.
later, my
So you
father
decided
emailed
Ellie
me a
should
single
absorb Dad's
paragraph
reaction instead?
informing me I
That
was
is not
no
what I
longer
decided.
welcome at family
What did you
gatherings
decide?
until I
I decided to
apologized
keep
for the
everyone
scene
calm
at the
until I could
hospital.
figure out what to do.
I did not
By letting Dad find the
apologize.
envelope in Ellie's coat.
I started no
Her eyes came
contact on
back
a
to mine.
Tuesday in early
Your father
September
found
of
it.
2023.
I didn't.
What I did
know.
not know,
I was there when he told
what
me.
nobody told
Then
me
stop
until
making it
2.5
sound like I put
years
it there.
later,
I didn't
was
say
that
you
2
did.
weeks after that.
I asked why you let the search continue when Mason had already admitted he used the card. Mom's jaw tightened. Because I did not know how far it had gone yet. That was not an answer. It was another layer of fog. I waited. Finally, she said, Ellie is 7. Kids recover from things. They bounce back. Mason is at an age where one label can follow him for years. College applications, programs, recommendations. You cannot pretend those stakes are equal. Something cold moved
on
from
a
Mason
hospital
that had nothing to
sketchpad.
do
My
with the
ID
weather.
badge was
It
crooked.
showed me sitting in a
Which
chair
I had
beside
pulled my
Lily's
phone
bed.
out only to
Holding
check
her. That's not what
time.
I said.
On the
That's
subject line
exactly
was
what
my
I
mother's
said.
voice, tied
Mom
her
stepped
own
away,
shaky
pausing. You always
handwriting.
do this.
5 words.
Turn
Final
everything
terms for
into
the
the
return
harshest
of graduating
possible
belongings.
interpretation.
Lily,
No,
please
I'm
read it in
listening.
full before
She is like
responding.
you, Morgan.
I
She
set the
slowed
cup down before
The
I read. I
sentences
never
hit
got
harder
it.
than I expected.
There was a long
For a
cadence of
moment,
her
I was
language,
not
even in
38
print.
years
She
old on
started
my own
crying
front
very
porch.
quietly
Sunday
into
school
the
teacher.
phone.
I was
First
9.
Baptist
She
said,
standing
for
in my parents'
22
ears
yellow.
while Dad stared at the broken ceramic bowl his mother had given him. Brittany had knocked it off the counter while reaching for something she had been told not to touch. She was already crying before Dad entered the room. Mom had pulled me aside and whispered that Brittany could not handle Dad being angry that night. She asked me to say we had both been playing near the counter. I had said yes. Later, Mom thanked me for being mature. I had forgotten the bowl. I had not forgotten the feeling of being praised because pain landed on me cleanly. You used to say that about me, I said. Mom frowned. Say what? That I was stronger than Brittany. You were, and somehow that always meant I could take more. Her expression shifted. Not guilt exactly. Recognition. That is not fair, she said. No, it wasn't. Mom shook her head. I came here trying to save this family, and you're dragging up things from 30 years ago. I'm not dragging anything up. I'm finally seeing the same rule applied to my daughter. That is ridiculous. Then answer one question. You knew Mason used Dad's gift card. Why did an empty envelope later come out of Ellie's coat? I told you I was trying to keep everyone calm. That doesn't explain how the envelope got there. I don't know what you want me to say. The truth would be useful. She stared at me, and I realized I had reached the point where asking harder would not produce more truth. Mom was not confused. She was choosing how much truth she could survive giving me. So I stopped asking. You will not be alone with Ellie for the foreseeable future, I said. You will not pick her up from school or activities. You will not discipline her. You will not call her privately to explain your side of this. Mom's face changed. You can't be serious. I am. You're keeping my granddaughter from me because I made one mistake? No, I'm changing your access because when you had authority over her, you used her as the person who could supposedly handle the damage. She needs her family. She needs adults who protect her. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but I did not confuse tears with accountability. She told me Dad was overreacting, Brittany was panicking, Mason was ashamed, and I was making everything permanent when it could still be fixed. I listened until she ran out of ways to describe everyone's pain except Ellie's. Then I opened the front door. You should go home. Morgan, please. I heard you. She stood on the porch another few seconds before turning away. After her car disappeared, I went inside and found Ellie on the couch with a book open across her knees. I sat beside her without telling her what had been said outside. My phone vibrated again before I could put it down. This time it was not Mom. It was my aunt, who had been at Christmas. Her message read, Your mom says you're cutting her off because Mason made one mistake. She wants everyone back at the house tomorrow night so this can be settled. I read it twice. Mom had not come to my porch to apologize. She had come to find out whether she could still control the story before she told it to everyone else. Dad called again Saturday afternoon after Mom had left my porch. By then, I had also heard from 2 relatives who had been at Christmas, both repeating some version of the same story. Mom said I was cutting her off because Mason made one impulsive mistake, and she wanted everyone back at the house Sunday evening so the family could clear the air. Dad told me he thought I should come because several of the people Mom had contacted had also watched Ellie stand beside that tree. I agreed to think about it, but I made one thing clear before he could say anything else. Ellie is not going. Dad said he understood, and I told him I meant more than keeping her out of the argument. Nobody was going to ask her for another memory, another explanation, or another performance of forgiveness so the adults could feel better about themselves. I also decided what I was not going to do. I was not posting anything online. I was not contacting Mason's school, his summer program, my mother's friends, or people who had never heard Ellie accused in the first place. I did not want a bigger audience. I wanted the original audience corrected. If 10 people had seen my daughter labeled a thief, Those 10 people were the ones who needed to hear what had actually happened. Anything beyond that would have stopped being about Ellie and started being about my anger. Dad was quiet for a few seconds after I explained that. Then he said, "I may have something." I assumed he meant another memory, but he told me to open the shared family photo folder on my phone. Dad took pictures constantly at holidays. I had barely thought about it because he photographed everything from the cinnamon rolls to the tree to people opening socks. Even when I walked into the living room on Christmas afternoon, he had been lowering his phone after taking another picture. Dad said he had spent part of the morning looking through the Christmas photos because Mom kept insisting everyone's memory was being distorted after the fact.
At the wedding, my
I
mom
opened the
texted
folder
me,
while he
they
smug
made
smug
her
as
sign
ever,
something.
no
There were more than
punctuation,
80 pictures
just her
from different
signature
joint
dashed like a
tenancy
slap in the
with
face
Uncle
wrapped in
Chuck. Some were
formal
useless.
tone.
She told
I
me
didn't
she
Most
didn't
showed
reply.
exactly what I
I
did.
logged into
trusted
my
Aunt
account,
Patty.
Mason
transferred
had
the
sleep on the couch. Brittany
My grandmother
$6,500
had given my
honeymoon
mother
fund
one
back to
lecture
myself,
to behave like a
and
daughter.
canceled the business
My
class
mother
flights I
clearly
booked
did
under her
not
name.
want what my mother
No
did not
shouting,
know
no
was that
drama.
the woman whose
Just a
signature
quiet
she had
little
just
click.
collected
By
had
morning,
already
I had 23
11
missed
months
calls.
earlier
Sometimes
sat
But
in a
only one
downtown
me-
so we focused on the pictures taken before that. At 11:17, Dad had photographed Brittany laughing while she tried to keep Mason from stealing another cinnamon roll. The picture was ordinary enough that I almost swiped past it. Then Dad said, "Look behind her." On a narrow side table near the doorway to the kitchen sat a red envelope. The silver snowflake sticker across the flap was visible without enlarging the image beyond what any normal phone could show. Mom was standing less than 2 feet away, partly turned toward the table, holding a stack of Christmas cards. My stomach tightened, but I made myself slow down. A red envelope with a silver sticker was not automatically my envelope. Christmas decorations were everywhere in that house, and red stationery was hardly rare. I opened my own photos from December 23rd. There was the picture I had sent Dad after sealing his gift. Same deep red paper, same silver snowflake sticker, placed slightly crooked across the right side of the flap because Ellie's pack of stickers had been sitting on my counter and I had grabbed one without thinking. I held the two images side by side on my screen. Dad stopped talking. "The sticker is in the same position," he finally said. "Yes. So that's the envelope. It looks like it. Morgan, it is." I understood why he wanted certainty. So did I. But I had spent 2 days learning how dangerous certainty became when people filled
Brenda
gaps
put the
with
stamp
whatever
back in her
conclusion
bag.
suited them.
She walked
I
out of
checked
the room without
metadata
saying
on
a
Dad's
word.
photograph.
My mother's face
11:17
turned the color
Christmas
of
morning.
cooked beets.
According to the
She
timeline
stood up,
Dad had written the night
smoothed
before,
her cardigan,
he did not
picked up the
discover
folder,
missing
and
gift
motioned
until
me
late.
into the hallway with 2
After
fingers.
Mason had already
In
gone
the hallway,
upstairs,
she did not
and
raise
Mom
her
had returned
voice.
to the living room.
My mother
Dad
never
checked
raised
several
her voice in
places before
public.
reaching Ellie's coat.
She leaned in
That meant
close
the
enough
photograph
that I could
existed
smell her
before the
morning
search
coffee.
that supposedly produced the
You
envelope
don't
from her
understand what
pocket.
we're trying to
Dad's
protect her
voice
from.
dropped.
From
Your
what,
mother had
Mom?
it.
That at night.
We
That
can prove it
overly
was
formal
She did it
tone
because
she
she was a
used
good
when she
daughter.
wanted
She
to
was
sound
holding
She did
above
it on
the
an
chaos
iPad
she
signed
often
to an Apple
created,
ID that
as though she
uploaded
were a
every
school
minute of
principal
footage
handing
to a
down a
family
suspension,
iCloud drive
rather
she had
than a
never
mother
logged
cutting
into
out
in
her
her
own
life.
son from
Someone
a
else
family
could have
She
used
had hung a
milestone.
camera in
The
the
room
room,
felt
without
unusually
and then
knowing
she
where
had
it came
pointed
from.
it
as if
at
the air
herself.
itself had paused to
Cassandra
see what he
texted
would
me
do
on a
next.
Noticed a
Wednesday.
missing step.
But
She
Ethan
was
didn't
wearing a
move.
camel
Mason had
trench
taken
He
her
didn't
car.
pace. He
Yes.
didn't write a furious
And then she
email or
closed.
call
Want to lose weight
anyone.
without losing muscle?
Instead,
Factor
he
got me
opened
there.
a blank
Somehow,
document
I was
on
tired
his
of all the
laptop
cutting and bulky
and
cycles.
typed,
Every
ended up
email
in
she had
Ellie's
ever
pocket.
sent all this
Opened,
time the
stared at
same
the two
way. I
photographs
thought you
on my
had
screen.
it.
That is
Your
exactly
father and
what
I
Ethan
prayed
said.
about
Dad
43
Wi-Fi
minutes.
again.
We're prepared to
told
give
him
back
it
what your
mattered to
grandmother
me
left for you. I
because I
told her
knew
about
what
the
Sunday
Yale
would
Committee
mean
after you
if I
cut about
exaggerated
Juliet's
one
essay.
fact.
Face us in person. About the letter
Mom would
Marlowe
attack
had
the
on
exaggeration
video.
and
3
use it
months.
to
She
discredit
listened.
everything
That
I
was how
speaking.
long my
I did not
grandmother
need
had been
to
at the
claim
end.
the
She
photograph
said,
for planting
I
evidence.
scrolled. What do you need me to
What we
do?
had was
41
already
bullets. I
bad
told her I
enough.
would call her back. I read them
Before
once the way
anyone
you
read
read
a
something
lab
I had to
report
do for a
first.
patient you don't
On
know
the
yet.
evening
Of
Mason
March
had
says,
redeemed the car.
drug-free
Before anyone
workplace.
searched Ellie's
Random
coat,
testing
the
in
empty
effect.
envelope was physically
I
present
had passed
beside
my
Linda.
December screen
Then
3
Linda
weeks
suggested
earlier.
checking codes.
I called my old church friend
Dad
Bethany
became
on
the person who
speakerphone
pulled that
and
same
asked her
envelope
gently
from Ellie's pocket
what people were
and
saying.
believed he had discovered
She
something
paused for a
independently.
long time.
I found it,
She
Dad
said,
softly.
Patty
You
says
found
you've
what
been
someone
struggling
wanted
with
found.
substances
He
and
inhaled through
toxic
his nose.
influences.
She used
She
me.
says they've had
I
to
don't
set
know
hard
exactly what
boundaries
she
to
did
protect
yet.
Mama.
You know enough. I did
Substances
know enough
and
to
toxic
understand
influence.
why the envelope had always bothered me. Dad finding it had given the accusation credibility. If Mom herself had suddenly produced it and pointed at Ellie, people might have questioned her. Instead, Dad had reached into a child's coat and pulled out the object everyone was searching for. He had not been lying. That was what made him useful. Dad asked me to send him my December 23rd photo so he could keep both images together. I did, then saved copies of his Christmas photo and its timestamp into the same folder as the redemption record and Mom's text to Mason. I still did not have proof of the exact moment the envelope entered Ellie's pocket. I no longer needed to pretend I did. I had proof that Mom's story about the envelope being discovered only after the search was missing a very important part. Dad asked, "Are you still coming tomorrow?" "Yes." "What are you going to do with the picture?" I looked at the photograph again, at the red envelope sitting quietly on the table while everyone in the room still thought Christmas was normal. Then I closed the folder, put it in the same room where her story started. Brittany came to my house late Sunday morning without Mason. She had texted first, which I appreciated after Mom's unannounced visit the day before. Ellie was spending a few hours with a friend from school, so for once I did not have to move an adult conversation into another room to protect her from it. Brittany sat at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she never drank. She looked exhausted. "I should have called you Thursday night," she said. "After Mason told me." I agreed. She flinched, probably expecting me to soften it, but there was nothing useful in pretending otherwise. She admitted that once Mason confessed, she had convinced herself the worst part had already happened. Ellie was home with me, the sign was gone, and telling Dad immediately might cost Mason the summer program. I kept thinking I could make him return what he bought, make him apologize, and then nobody else had to get hurt. I asked her whether she understood now what was wrong with that sentence. She nodded. Ellie had already been hurt, so I treated that like it was finished. Brittany had brought an apology Mason had written. She slid the folded page across the table and said he wanted Ellie to have it. Then she added too quickly, "If he apologizes and returns the tablet, maybe tomorrow night doesn't have to turn into this huge thing." I pushed the letter back toward her. "Those are two separate issues." She frowned. I told her Mason was allowed to apologize because he owed Ellie an apology. That apology did not buy silence from me, and it did not require Ellie to read it. If he wrote because he wanted forgiveness in exchange for keeping the evidence off Mom's dinner table, then it was not an apology. It was a transaction. Brittany looked embarrassed. "I didn't mean it like that." I believed her. That was part of the problem with my family. So much damage had been done by people who did not mean things exactly the way they sounded. I reminded her of the limits I had already set. I was not calling police over a $500 gift card that could be returned. I was not contacting Mason's school, the engineering program, or anybody involved in his college plans. I was not posting about him online. I was not going to punish a 16-year-old as if my anger gave me parental authority over him. Brittany was his mother. Dad was the person who had offered to fund most of the summer program. They would decide what consequences followed. "But I am clearing Ellie's name tonight," I said. "That part is not negotiable." Brittany looked down at the folded letter. "Mom thinks you want to humiliate Mason." I shook my head. If I wanted to humiliate Mason, Ellie would be at that dinner watching him get exposed. She won't be there. I want the adults who watched her wear that sign to know why she never should have worn it. Brittany's phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen, then at me. "It's Mason. He wants to talk to you." I told her he could call if she stayed in the room. A minute later, she put him on speaker. Mason sounded different from the boy I had heard Friday night. Still scared, but no longer trying to find the smallest possible version of what he had done. "Aunt Morgan, I took the whole envelope," he said, "not just the code. I asked him to start at the beginning and only tell me what he remembered. He said he woke before most of the house, saw the red envelope under the tree, and knew from the electronics store logo on the printed page inside that it contained a gift card. He had wanted the graphics tablet for months, and the retailer was showing low stock. He told himself he would use the code, then replace the money from weekend work and birthday cash before Grandpa noticed." Even through the phone, I could hear how ridiculous that plan sounded to him now. After redeeming the code and placing his order, Mason kept the envelope and the printed gift page because he panicked and did not know where to put them. When Mom realized Dad's gift was missing, Mason followed her toward the kitchen and confessed. He told her exactly what he had done. "I had the empty envelope and the printout all crushed up in my hoodie pocket," he said. Grandma put out her hand and said, "Give me whatever you have left." So I gave both to her. Brittany closed her eyes. The phrase Ellie had heard finally had its meaning. It had been sitting in my notebook since Friday like a loose thread, and Mason had just pulled it straight. "What happened next?" I asked. Mason said Mom told him he had already done enough and sent him upstairs. Then she texted him not to come down or say anything until she spoke to Brittany. He heard people moving around downstairs and eventually understood they were searching for the missing envelope. "I knew I should come down," he said. I didn't. He had trusted Grandma to fix it because, in his words, "She always fixes stuff." I asked whether Mom ever mentioned Ellie to him. He hesitated, then said yes. When he told her he could not let Ellie get blamed, Mom had said, "She's 7. She'll get over it. You have more to lose." Nobody spoke for several seconds after that. I did not tell Mason everything was fine because it wasn't. I also did not tell him Ellie forgave him because that decision did not belong to me. "If you want to make this right," I said, "the first step is telling the truth to the same people who
A
heard
part
the
written
lie."
by my mother.
He asked whether he had to come
I would
to
have to
dinner.
find that one myself.
I told
The
him
honor
that was
committee
between
process
him
began
and
on March
Brittany.
4th.
But if he can't,
I drafted a formal
I
request
expected him
and
not
sent
to
it
let
to
Grandma
Marlo.
turn what happened
I
into
asked
another
the committee to
misunderstanding.
compare my
He
submitted
said
personal
quietly,
statement from the 2025 cycle
Brittany
with
wiped her
Juliet's
face and
submitted
asked if
personal
the
statement
apology
from the
letter was pointless now.
2024 cycle,
I told her no.
specifically the paragraphs
It just had
referencing
to
a
remain what it was
pediatric
supposed to be.
oncology patient.
An apology,
I attached my
not a
original
bargain.
draft
Ellie
document
could
from
decide
spring
later whether
2020.
she wanted to read it. After Brittany left, I prepared for dinner. I did less than Mom probably expected. I printed one page with the timeline. 7:18, gift card redeemed. 7:29, Mason's order posted. 9:40, Ellie arrived. Before the search, Mason confessed to Linda. Then came the search, the envelope, and the sign. I printed the redemption record, Mom's text telling Mason to stay upstairs and keep quiet, and Dad's Christmas photo showing the red envelope beside her before it was supposedly found in Ellie's coat. No slideshow, no binder, no dramatic stack of evidence. If the truth needed decoration to survive, it was not strong enough yet. Before leaving, I read the page once and reminded myself of the only things I needed to accomplish. Clear Ellie's name. Establish when Mom knew. Show that the envelope had been in Mom's control before Dad found it. State the boundary. Leave. I was not going there to make Linda confess to every bad decision she had ever made or force my relatives to choose me over her. When I reached my parents' house Sunday evening, cars already lined the curb. Through the dining room window, I could see the same relatives who had been there Christmas afternoon. Mom sat at the head of the table in the chair she always claimed, without anyone discussing it. There were several pages arranged neatly in front of her. She had prepared, too. Mom began before I had taken my coat off. "Thank you for coming. I asked everyone here because this has gotten completely out of proportion." Her pages were stacked neatly in front of her, and she had placed a yellow legal pad beside them as if we were attending a meeting she had called to order. Dad sat 2 chairs away instead of beside her. Brittany was across from him, with Mason next to her. My aunt and 2 other relatives who had been at Christmas filled the remaining seats. I chose the chair closest to the door. Mom looked at me. "I want to start by saying nobody handled Christmas perfectly." That sentence told me exactly what she planned to do. If everyone had made mistakes, then no one person had made a choice. She continued. "Mason used a gift card that wasn't his. He has admitted it. He is returning what he bought. What concerns me now is that Morgan has decided one mistake by a 16-year-old should tear apart an entire family." I never said that. Mom held up a hand. "Please let me finish." I lit her. She talked about stress, misunderstandings, emotions running high, and the danger of destroying a teenager's future over something he regretted immediately. She said the sign around Ellie's neck had been poor judgment, but insisted nobody had intended to traumatize her. Then she reached the sentence I had expected. Once Morgan learned Mason was responsible, she decided to punish me for trying to keep the situation under control. My aunt glanced toward me. I waited until Mom stopped. "Are you finished?" Her mouth tightened. "For now." I pulled one sheet from my folder. "Good. Because I'm not here to discuss whether Mason should lose his future. I'm here because Ellie was called a thief in front of everyone in this room. Mason stared at the table. I placed the timeline in the center, where everyone could see it. The gift card was redeemed at 7:18 Christmas morning. Ellie was at my house. She did not arrive here until 9:40. Mason placed his order 11 minutes after the card was redeemed. Before anyone searched for the envelope, Mason told Mom he had used the card. Mom leaned forward. That is not the whole conversation. I didn't say it was. I slid the screenshot of her text beside the timeline. You told him to stay upstairs and not say anything until you spoke to Brittany. Mom looked around the table. Because he was panicking. That may be why you sent him upstairs. It does not explain what happened downstairs. Brittany spoke before Mom could answer. Mason told me Friday night that he used the card. Mom snapped her head toward her. Brittany. My sister swallowed but continued. I should have called Morgan immediately. I didn't. I was scared Dad would pull the summer program, and I thought if Mason returned the tablet we could fix it without making things worse. Dad looked at her. You knew Friday? Yes. His disappointment was quiet. That made it heavier. Mom turned back to me. So Brittany made a bad decision too. Are you cutting her off? This is not a competition for who behaved worst. Then, what exactly are you trying to prove? I took out Dad's Christmas photo. This was taken at 11:17. Dad passed the photograph down the table. Nobody said anything at first. Then, my aunt pointed toward the background. That's the envelope. Yes. Mom immediately shook her head. A red envelope at Christmas. That proves nothing. I placed my December 23rd photo beside it. Same envelope, same silver snowflake sticker, same placement on the flap, Dad said. I took the Christmas picture before I found the envelope in Ellie's coat. Mom looked at him. You do not know that with absolute certainty. I checked the timestamp. Her face changed slightly. I kept my voice calm. I am not claiming this photograph shows you putting the envelope in Ellie's pocket. It does not. What it shows is that before the search, the envelope was sitting on the side table beside you. Later, after you suggested checking everyone's coats, Dad found that same envelope in Ellie's pocket. Mom pushed the photographs back toward me. You are implying something you cannot prove. I'm describing the sequence. You want everyone here to believe I planted it. I want everyone here to know what is established and what is not. For the first time since I arrived, Mason looked up. Grandma had the envelope. Mom went completely still. Brittany touched his arm. Mason. He looked at her, then at Dad. I gave it to Grandma. Mom said his name sharply. He kept going. I had the empty envelope and the printed gift page in my hoodie pocket. I told Grandma what I did. She held out her hand and said, Give me whatever you have left. So I gave it to her. Nobody moved. My aunt looked from Mason to Mom. Dad's expression seemed to collapse inward. Mom spoke carefully. And what did I do with it after that? Mason hesitated. I don't know. Exactly. She looked at me as if she had won something. He does not know. You do not know. Thomas does not know. No, I said. We don't. That answer frustrated her more than an accusation would have. I continued. But Mason does know what you told him when he said Ellie was getting blamed. Mom's eyes moved toward him. Mason's face reddened. I had not wanted to force him into this. I had already told him he was not required to perform for us. But he had come, and he had told me earlier that if Grandma tried to turn it into a misunderstanding, he would tell the truth. Dad asked quietly, What did she say? Mason swallowed. She said Ellie was 7. She said Ellie would get over it. Mom closed her eyes for a moment. Mason continued. She said I had more to lose. The room went silent. Not dramatic silence. No gasps. No shouting. Just the kind of quiet that happens when every possible explanation has suddenly become smaller than the truth sitting in the middle of the table. Mom recovered first. I was trying to stop a 16-year-old from ruining his future. Dad stared at her. By letting a 7-year-old take the blame? I was buying time. You let us put that sign around her neck. I told you the sign was too much. So did I, Dad said, and I still left it there. That was the first time I heard him say it, without trying to reduce his responsibility. Mom turned to me. You wanted this. You wanted everyone sitting here judging me. No, don't, Lee. I wanted the people who saw Ellie called a thief to know she wasn't one. You brought documents. You brought photographs. You came prepared to humiliate me. I came prepared because you spent 2 days changing the story. Her cheeks flushed. You are tearing this family apart over one Christmas. I shook my head. No. I'm stopping you from deciding who in this family is allowed to carry damage for someone else. Mom laughed bitterly. You always were dramatic when you wanted to make a point. That might have worked on me years ago. It didn't now. I gathered the papers but left the timeline in the center of the table. Ellie will not be alone with you. You will not pick her up, discipline her, or contact her privately. If she ever wants that relationship changed later, we can revisit it. Mom stared at me. You cannot keep my granddaughter from me. I can decide who has unsupervised access to my child. Brittany wiped her face. Dad looked exhausted. Mason sat with both hands pressed between his knees, but he was no longer looking down. Mom turned toward him. After everything I have done for you. His expression changed. Not anger. Something closer to understanding. That's the problem, Grandma. I watched those words land. Mom did too. For years, she had believed rescuing people proved they needed her. Sitting there, I think she finally realized the person she had protected most was beginning to see the cost of being protected that way. I stood. Mom's voice followed me. So that's it? You're just going to leave? I put on my coat. That was enough. The rest of your life is yours to explain. I left before she could turn the truth into another debate. Dad called me less than an hour later. He did not ask me to come back. He said, Morgan, there are things I need to look at. Things from before Christmas. I stopped halfway through locking my front door. What things? Money I thought went missing. A repair Linda paid for without telling me. Mason's watch incident last spring. His voice sounded different now. Not confused. Suspicious. And for the first time, Christmas no longer looked like the beginning of Mom's lie. It looked like the first one that had failed. Dad came to my house the next afternoon with a manila folder under his arm. I had not asked him to investigate Mom, and I made that clear before he even sat down. He said he knew. What he wanted was to show me why Christmas had frightened him so much after I left. Once he stopped assuming Mom's explanations were harmless, several old incidents began looking different. He had gone through his own bank statements, receipts, and messages, not hers, and found payments he remembered only vaguely because Mom had always supplied an explanation before he thought to ask a second question. The first involved his car. The previous summer, Mason had taken it without permission and scraped the passenger side against a concrete pillar. Mom had told Dad Mason admitted it immediately and that she would handle the repair because Brittany was already under financial pressure. Dad had believed that was the whole story. What he found now was that Mom had paid the repair shop before Dad even knew the car had been damaged, then coached Mason to tell him the scrape happened while moving the car in the driveway. Mason later admitted to Dad that Grandma had told him there was no point upsetting Grandpa after the damage had already been fixed. Dad did not tell me this as proof of some crime. He told me because he finally recognized the same reasoning he had heard at Christmas. Once the harm existed, Mom treated honesty as optional. Another incident involved an old watch Dad had given Mason to wear at a school event the previous spring. Mason had damaged the clasp and cracked the crystal. Mom quietly took it to a jeweler, paid for the repair, and returned it to Dad's dresser before he knew anything had happened. At the time, Dad thought he had misplaced it for several days. Mom later laughed about finding it in the wrong drawer. Dad now had the repair receipt because the jeweler had emailed it to their shared household account. Again, the amount was not enormous. The problem was that Mom had constructed a false explanation so nobody had to watch Mason face disappointment. Dad also found smaller things that never would have mattered alone. Cash he had assumed he lost after a family barbecue had been replaced from Mom's personal spending account the next morning. Mason admitted he had borrowed it without asking and planned to put it back. A school fee Brittany had said she could not cover had actually been paid twice because Mom paid it secretly after Dad had already transferred money to Brittany. Mom used the extra to cover another expense rather than tell him. None of those discoveries turned her into a criminal mastermind. They did something more damaging to their marriage. They made Dad question how many ordinary memories had been edited for him before he ever knew there was anything to question. I kept thinking I was helping, he told me. I thought she was good at cleaning up messes. She was, I said. That's different from fixing what caused them. Dad stared at the folder for a long time. He told me he had asked Mom for complete honesty about anything else she had covered for Mason or Brittany. She accused him of treating decades of marriage like an audit. He told her the audit had started the moment he found an envelope in his granddaughter's coat, and later learned his wife already knew who had taken the gift. For the first time in my memory, Dad did not ask me what he should say next. That mattered because my old instinct was waiting for him to ask. I could have told him how to restructure their accounts, what boundaries to set with Brittany, what punishment Mason deserved, and how long Mom should be
At the
tucked away
time,
to family
it
gatherings.
had seemed like a
Cassie,
small
I was good
favor,
at turning
Use
one
the
of
family
many.
Apple ID.
He clicked
That
The
cancel.
old one Aunt Marianne
The page
set up
processed
on
for a
my
also
moment
made me use
before
my
confirming the
password,
refund.
handing me
$3,800
seconds.
deposited back to his
Already on
account
it.
within
What do you
5 to
think?
7
family
business
Apple
days.
ID had been on
He
Aunt
moved on to his
Marianne's
banking
phone
app,
before
I
she
already
died.
did
found
what
the
I had
transfer
to do.
It had
record
been
from
on
3 weeks
Walter's.
I got
prior.
Ellie
It
out
had
and
been on Cassandra's
$6,500 wired
It
to
had been on
Marilyn's
Zach's.
account,
access Mom has to
marked
her
My
daughter.
as
mother had never
wedding
used
gift
it because
honeymoon
my mother
support.
believed iCloud
He
was a
reversed
I was
it.
disappointed for about half a second, then nodded. Fair. Over the next several weeks, he made his own decisions. He did not empty joint accounts, freeze Mom out of marital money, or pretend decades of shared finances suddenly belonged only to him. Instead, he stopped allowing her to manage the discretionary money he personally set aside for the grandchildren. Any future tuition, camp fee, gift, or large expense from him would be paid directly to the program or provider, not passed through Mom or Brittany. He also moved household spending to a system where both he and Mom could see larger transfers and card payments. Mom hated it because it removed the quiet space where she had always been able to solve one problem with money before anyone knew it existed. Dad also withdrew his offer to pay almost the entire cost of Mason's summer engineering program. He did not cancel Mason's enrollment or contact the program. He told Brittany and Mason that he would still contribute part of the cost if Mason returned the graphics tablet, repaid the portion of the gift card that could not be recovered, and earned some of the remaining tuition himself. Mason got a weekend job at a grocery store in January. Brittany covered part of the difference. Dad covered part. For the first time, Grandma did not make the shortage disappear. Mason returned the tablet unopened. The retailer restored most of the purchase value to the original gift card balance, which Dad eventually used toward the tablet he had wanted in the first place. Mason paid back the small, non-refundable portion over the next several weeks. He never asked me to protect him from that consequence. And I never asked Dad to make it harsher. Brittany had a harder time. For several days after the dinner, she alternated between apologizing and insisting I could not understand what fear did to a mother when her child's future seemed threatened. I told her I understood fear perfectly. What I would not accept was using fear as permission to sacrifice somebody else's child. Eventually, she stopped defending the choice and simply named it. She had known Ellie was innocent and stayed quiet because telling the truth felt more expensive to her in that moment. A week into January, Brittany brought Mason's apology letter back to my house. She did not hand it directly to Ellie. She gave it to me and said Ellie could read it whenever she wanted, or never. That was the first time I felt Brittany had understood the boundary instead of merely obeying it. I told Ellie what the letter was, and let her decide. She left it unopened on her desk for nearly 2 weeks before reading it one Saturday morning. She did not tell me everything Mason wrote. I did not ask. She only said, "He said he should have come downstairs." Then she folded the letter again and put it in a drawer. A few days later, she asked if she had to forgive him before she was ready. I told her no. Forgiveness was not a deadline adults could assign to make family gatherings easier. Mom's consequences lasted longer because hers were not attached to one purchase or one apology. She lost the thing she had relied on more than money: automatic access. She no longer picked Ellie up from school. She did not have private phone calls with her. She did not host the next family gathering. Dad refused to let her decide how Mason should be disciplined. And Brittany stopped calling her every time something went wrong. Even relatives who had always treated Mom as the person who settled disputes began asking questions before accepting her version of events. Mom called me often in January. At first, she wanted me to admit the punishment had become disproportionate. Then she wanted me to understand that Dad was treating her like a stranger. Later, she cried and said the family was falling apart because nobody trusted her judgment anymore. I listened once. Then I told her trust was not something I could order everyone else to return. "You got what you wanted," she said. "No," I told her. What I wanted was for Ellie to spend Christmas opening gifts. She had no answer to that. By February, Mom had started counseling with Dad. I did not treat that as redemption. And I did not treat their marriage as my business. Dad told me only that he was staying in the marriage for now but would not return to pretending peace and trust were the same thing. That was enough information for me. I am telling this story in March, only a few months after that Christmas, and some things are still unresolved. Ellie has seen Mom twice since then, both times with me present. The first visit lasted less than an hour. Mom apologized without using the word but, which was more than I had expected. Ellie listened politely, then asked if we could go home. What changed most was not Mom, Dad, Brittany, or even Mason. It was the way I understood my own role. I had spent years believing strength meant absorbing small unfairness because I could afford to absorb it. I had called that maturity.
During their
I had called
courtship,
it
you
in
watched her die from a
1956,
paragraph
I
her
had
mother
never
handed
noticed
you
how
in
easily
57.
that
That,
logic taught
before
us
they
not to
married
be
in
standing the strongest
1958.
person
That
in
is
the
a decision
heaviest
there was
you
the
made.
sapphire
I still have the
engagement ring
cardboard
she said
spot.
her in Charleston. You don't have to do
Ellie
this
did not
tomorrow.
know
There
I
was the
kept it.
purple heart
I
he had
said,
earned
"It is
outside
sealed
his
inside
city
a
in
folder with the
1958.
redemption record."
Dad
She
never
hung
spoken
up,
of
and the
once.
timeline
I
from that
saved the
Sunday
call. There was a
dinner.
family
I am
Bible
not
from
keeping it
19
for
at 11:18
free or
with my
because
mother
I
left
expect it
great
myself.
grandparents
I
written
keep
4
it
minutes
because
for
there
play
may
12
come a day
seconds.
when distant
Elizabeth, there was a
Christmas
recipe
looks
book. Listen
smaller
to
than
me
it
keeping
was.
since she got
And I
you
know
this
myself
tomorrow.
well enough to understand the temptation to minimize old pain once the immediate danger is gone. The last time Mom asked when things would finally go back to normal, I realized I no longer wanted the old normal back. In the old normal, Mason made mistakes and Grandma erased them. Brittany panicked, and someone stronger absorbed the cost. Dad disliked conflict and waited for it to pass. I saw problems, solved whatever touched me directly, and convinced myself the rest belonged to other adults. That system worked until it reached my daughter. Then I stopped participating. You should never confuse keeping the peace with allowing someone else to carry an unfair burden. When a child is blamed, humiliated, or punished without proof, your first responsibility is to protect that child, then verify the facts calmly. Evidence matters, but boundaries matter just as much. You cannot force toxic relatives to admit the truth, but you can decide how much access they have to your family. Real accountability means consequences that match the harm, not revenge for its own sake. If this story gave you something worth remembering, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more.